Welcome to the Luke Macias Show. We are going to talk about the 10 Commandments and the Texas Rangers. And what is more Texan than that? Or Louisianan? I don't know. We'll figure that out. Let's get to the show. I love the Texas Rangers. I was not trying to imply that the Texas Rangers are in any way Louisiana Rangers. Didn't happen, wouldn't happen. The awesome thing about this sports franchise is that they're the only Major League Baseball team in America to not have a Pride night on Pride Month. Okay? And even though this isn't something that the government has dictated, something the government has been able to influence at this time, it is worth recognizing that while the nation engages in a month dedicated to the praise and uplifting of debauchery, the Texas Rangers have decided to not participate. And that is a testimony to not only the sports franchise, but the fan base of that team, of baseball fans in general, who are more conservative than the average American. I don't know what it is about progressives who don't like to engage in the sport of baseball as much as red-blooded Americans. But the reality is that it is worth recognizing and appreciating the fact that the Texas Rangers are the only Major League Baseball team in America to not have a Pride night during Pride Month. Now, the 10 Commandments will now be on display in every, drumroll, Louisiana classroom, not Texas classroom. Why? Because last year, the Texas Senate passed Senate Bill 1515 by Phil King. This bill would have required public schools to display the 10 Commandments in every classroom. Now, this is the bill that they just passed in Louisiana and signed into law. It is getting national coverage because Louisiana is the first state in the union to pass this law. Now, this law is supported heavily by Republicans, heavily by independents, and even by nearly 40% of Democrats in public polling that was available a year or two ago. So we can look at these issues and realize these are not super controversial issues, and yet SB 1515 was killed in the calendars committee by Dustin Burrows, Chairman Dustin Burrows. The quote-unquote clock ran out on that legislation. Now, the reality is that the reason Louisiana's law is getting so much attention is that they are the first state in the nation to do so. They're the first state in the nation to actually put the 10 Commandments on display in classrooms. If you want children, we have this problem in Texas. I actually was talking to somebody about this yesterday for dinner, but it's a common problem. We have all these patriots moving in, and we are trying to import enough patriots to offset the Marxists that we're paying to create through the K through 12 system and the college system that we are funding. We are funding this entire system, and we have. It will change next session, but so far we have basically kowtowed to the teacher unions and more of the liberal universities. And so we are just starting to turn the corner on changing the relationship status we have with these institutions. But basically for the last little while, we have paid for them to create as many Marxists as possible, and then prayed that enough patriotic Californians move in to offset the Marxists that we are paying to create. So if you want to create less Marxists, a good step in the right direction would be to just put the 10 Commandments up in every single classroom in Texas. Lieutenant Governor Patrick put out a op-ed on this called Could've, Would've, Should've. And he said Texas would have been and should have been the first state in the nation to put the 10 Commandments back in our schools. Last session, the Texas Senate passed Senate Bill 1515 by Senator Phil King of Weatherford on April 20th and sent it over to the House to do what Louisiana just did. Every Texas Republican House member would have voted for it, which is true. Remember, the problem in the Texas House is not that there aren't enough of them that will vote to put the 10 Commandments in classrooms. It's that leadership, Dustin Burrows and Dade Phelan, won't let it happen. Okay? I'm not quoting from Dan Patrick right now. I'm just telling you that. Let's go back to his statement. But Speaker Dade Phelan killed the bill by letting it languish in committee for a month, assuring it would never have time for a floor vote. This was inexcusable and unacceptable. Putting the Ten Commandments back into our schools was obviously not a priority for Dade Phelan. Here's more about the bill that Speaker Phelan killed because the Democrats who put him in power opposed it, which goes back to the fact of what we're talking about. The reality is that Dade Phelan creates a bipartisan coalition of his leadership team where he is dependent on Democrats for his speakership and is then therefore accountable to them. So they cut a number of deals and kill legislation like the Ten Commandments bill at the end of the session in an effort to appease. They kill the bill to appease the Democrats that put them in the chair position. And the people that are killing it with them are people like Dustin Burrows and Brad Buckley, who are part of the leadership team. This is the same thing that Stephanie Klick did last session when she killed the ban on sex change surgeries. And then this session, when she passed the ban on sex change surgeries, she still saw fit to vote against Tony Tinderholt's amendment, one of 11 Republicans, that would have just said, hey, hospitals are not going to get money who are socially transitioning children. So if your mental health care facility is socially transitioning children, you're not going to get this government grant. And Stephanie Klick voted against it because she's part of the leadership team. And she understands that the deals we've cut are even at the point in time that we passed the sex change surgery ban 2 years after we kill it. We're now just going to pass it. We're not going to do anything else to stop transgendering children. And if you think, okay, Luke, maybe I'm not convinced that's true. I'm not convinced that House leadership really just does the bare minimum they can, ban sex change surgeries, but doesn't do anything more regarding the transgendering of kids. Well, let me read a letter that Brian Harrison and Mays Middleton sent to the commissioner of the Health and Human Services Commission in Texas, the Texas Health and Human Services Commission. Now, this was actually sent after Brian Harrison sent a letter to Dade Phelan, okay? And I'm going to get to that in a second because I think it's going to prove the point that I'm making regarding House leadership's approach to the transgendering of children. This is a letter from Brian Harrison and Mays Middleton to Executive Commissioner Cecil Young of the Health and Human Services Commission. Executive Commissioner Young and Inspector General Winter, that's Inspector General Raymond Charles Winter of the Health and Human Services Commission. As you may recall, on February 21st, 2022, Attorney General Ken Paxton, in an opinion of the Attorney General, concluded that, quote, sex change procedures on children and prescription of puberty blockers to be child abuse under state law. Therefore, the Texas legislature enacted and Governor Abbott signed into law SB 14, which prohibited such procedures in Texas. Following the issuance of the OAG opinion, Texas Children's Hospital stated that it would no longer perform these procedures on or prescribe puberty blockers and drugs to minors. So what happens is Ken Paxton says, this is child abuse. Then the hospital comes out and says, well, we're not doing it anymore then, because it's child abuse. Later on, the legislature passes a bill that Stephanie Klick killed. They pass it this time. In some ways, Paxton kind of put their feet to the fire. Unfortunately, we have now learned, thanks to a brave physician and whistleblower at Texas Children's Hospital, Dr. Ethan Haim, that Texas Children's Hospital appears to have continued performing these procedures after it promised otherwise. We have also learned of allegations from a nurse at Texas Children's Hospital, Vanessa Sivage, that not only has Texas Children's Hospital were they performing these banned procedures, but also billing Medicaid and CHIP for them. As you are aware, the Texas Medical Provider Procedure Manual has long excluded from Medicaid reimbursements sex change operations, which the Texas Health and Human Services Commission interprets to also include prescription drugs for the purpose of gender-affirming care. Additionally, these procedures on minors are now illegal in Texas. As a result, submitting a claim for the payments of these procedures or drugs violates both the Texas False Claims Act and the Federal False Claims Act. This is perhaps no more important responsibility There is perhaps no more important responsibility we all share than to be good stewards with tax dollars. And we are deeply concerned with the flagrant misuse of Medicaid and CHIP funds that is occurring. If true, not only do the actors involved know they are perpetuating a fraud, but they are doing it to engage in child abuse. We refuse to sit idly by while children are being harmed in our state and our constituents are being forced to fund it. Therefore, we formally request that you, 1, do an immediate investigation into Texas Children's Hospital to determine if they have been illegally reimbursed by Medicaid for transgender procedures, and 2, determine the people involved in the fraud, including hospital leadership. 3, take swift corrective actions. We appreciate your consideration. For Liberty, Brian Harrison and Mays Middleton. Now, the thing that is important to also point out is that 5 days before this letter, Brian Harrison sent a letter to Speaker Phelan, emergency hearing request on potential Medicaid fraud and Department of Justice protections of child abusers. Okay. So now we have Joe Biden, who's coming after this whistleblower, Ethan Haim, and he's decided to make an example of him and literally try to use lawfare to imprison Ethan for being a whistleblower because he came out and called out a Texas hospital for potentially committing fraud while also attempting to transition as many children as possible. Now, remember what I said earlier. The whole point of this Stephanie Click, Dustin Burrows, Brad Buckley, Dade Phelan kind of conglomerate of individuals is they're in power as part of this shared agreement with Democrats. So the way it works then is that 2 years ago, they killed the ban on sex change surgeries. And then last session, they were like, look, we've gotten too much heat over it. A couple of us almost lost our elections. So we're going to pass the ban. But we're passing it after like 8 states have passed it. So you got to transition a couple more kids for a couple more years. And now we're going to do it. But here's the thing. We think if we just do this one ban, then the headlines will be things we can kind of live off of for a while. So we're not going to do anything more than that. Which is why when Tony Tinderholt comes in and says, I want to actually protect children from being socially transitioned by these mental health facilities and at least put some financial incentive for them to stop doing it, even if we can't ban it, Stephanie Click and JC Jatan say, no way, right? And that's why they're no longer here. Then we realize, hey, the Biden administration is trying to imprison this doctor who just revealed through whistleblower acts potential fraud that are being committed by a Texas hospital that is transitioning children. So then Brian Harrison sends a letter to the speaker. As you likely recall, last year, we had this brave doctor who was a whistleblower. He exposed the continuation of sex change procedures on children as young as 11 years old. And he also goes on to talk about how basically President Biden's Department of Justice showed up with heavily armed agents to Dr. Haim's house to serve him 4 felony indictments related to the alleged HIPAA violations. So they're saying the fact that you were a whistleblower and revealed this was happening violated people's rights to privacy. They want to put him in prison for 10 years. So then, here's what he's asking Dade Phelan to do. Due to the passage of SB 14 last session, the procedures Dr. Hames exposed are now illegal in Texas, especially in light of this legislation. It is vital that anyone, including medical professionals who witness these acts, be able to speak out. And then here's what he says. The Texas House of Representatives must not sit idly by and allow this federal overreach to occur. Right? They're coming in and they're trying to put this guy in prison for 10 years for exposing something that we made illegal and that already was deemed child abuse by the Attorney General of Texas. Then here's what he says. The Biden administration is impeding the ability of the Texas legislature to operate by stifling whistleblowers' willingness to petition the government via the media. Here's the key. Listen. I formally request you to order an immediate interim hearing in one of the numerous committees with jurisdiction to investigate the situation to determine, 1, if Texas Children's Hospital is defrauding Medicaid, 2, if Biden administration officials are aiding and abetting child abuse in Texas, including subpoenaing federal officials involved from both the DOJ and the Department of Health and Human Services. And 3, what detrimental impact these actions may have on the legislature's ability to function effectively due to the stifling of potential whistleblowers. Texas must lead the nation in the defense of the next generation and state sovereignty. Now, that's the request to the speaker. And the question you might ask yourself is, what has the speaker done? That request was done over a week ago. So has he acted on it? Has he done anything? He has not only not acted on it, he has not even responded for a week. And if you ask yourself, why would you just not respond? What all the speaker has to do is literally send a letter to Tom Oliverson, or send a letter to Stephanie Click, or send a letter to James Frank. I don't know, any of these people. State Affairs, General Investigating and Ethics, Andrew Murr, any of them, or all of them, and say, hey guys, we have a doctor who was a whistleblower to talk about the fact that 11-year-old kids were getting sex change surgeries, and now Joe Biden wants to put him in prison for 10 years. And we as Texas are not going to stand idly by. We are going to take actions to put pressure on Texas Children's Hospitals and others involved to stand up for this Texas doctor. Are they doing anything? No, because they can't do anything more. They're already in bed with Democrats. They did the bare minimum. So they can't talk about the social transitioning, and they can't talk about the 10 Commandments, and they can't talk about Joe Biden trying to put this guy in prison for 10 years. Mitch Little said it best. He tweeted out, I'm going to have a really hard time taking your leadership seriously if you can't get it in gear over child gender transition treatments, Medicaid fraud, and illegals murdering children. Wake up. Wake up.
America is at a crossroads. Now, more than ever, Texas must step up and lead the country. We don't have time to mess around. The only way to save America is with a strong Texas. You and I know this, but so do the enemies of life and liberty. Therefore, you and I have no choice but to stand up and fight. I'm Sarah Gonzalez, and to the enemies of liberty, I say, come and take it.
I'm going to have a really hard time taking your leadership seriously if you can't get it in gear over child gender transition treatments, Medicaid fraud, and illegals murdering children. Well said, Mitch Little. This is the current state of Texas House leadership. So if you are a member of the leadership team, you're trying to figure out, how do I survive? And that's the last thing I'm going to talk about today as we close this out. What is our path? Very briefly, and I might go into this more next week if I have time, but here's the broad version of what I continue to say, which is that we have these huge disagreements in January through May on policy, which make for huge disagreements at the ballot box in March and May in the runoffs and primaries. So the disagreement that the Texas House had with the Attorney General, Ken Paxton, is whether he should be the Attorney General. The disagreement they had with the governor is whether his legislative priorities that they can address in January and February should be talked about at all. And if they are going to be talked about, maybe we'll wait till the very, very end and not take it seriously. The disagreement what they had with the Lieutenant Governor in the Texas Senate was like whether the work they did should be given respect on the Texas House and allowed to process through the process if it has the votes to pass, should it even get to have a vote on the floor. The disagreement they have with the Republican Party of Texas is whether their chairman should even be elected at the convention, whether they should, the money that they get for filing fees that gets given to the Secretary of State could potentially be withheld from them if they don't do exactly what the politicians want. Basically trying to defund the Texas GOP. That's a big disagreement, by the way. If you're on the SREC or a county chairman or the state chair or a donor or an activist in the Texas GOP, you really don't like it that the politicians are trying to defund their own party. The disagreement with people like Nate Schatzline and Brian Harrison and Steve Toth and Tony Tinderholt are literally, do you even have the right to be a member and participate like the Democrats do, right? So you treat these people like they're less than Democrats and then wonder why they continue to fight you every day. And guess what? They then go out and fight for Texas all across the state. And then the caucus is like, maybe we should kick these guys out. They're big disagreements we have. Therefore, they lead to big battles in March and May. Now, there is a path to the Texas House choosing a different leadership path. And the numbers, let's just be honest about the numbers in the Texas House caucus. The numbers are not there to say one of the 10 most conservative members of the legislature are going to be the speaker. It's just not there. You need 53 votes, I think. I don't remember what the number is. Somewhere in the 50s is how many votes you need to choose a speaker. But the question is whether the Dustin Burrows and Greg Bonin and Dade Phelan, the Stephanie Click faction that makes these deals and sets us all up and picks all these fights, if they're going to keep running everything. And the path to lowering our disagreements and therefore lowering the conflict we have in March and May is the Texas House deciding that they want a leader that's going to approach things in such a way that they're not picking fights. Their disagreement with the agriculture commissioner is whether he should be able to travel. That's the disagreement, right? They gut his budget more than any other statewide official. They poke him in the eye. And so he goes around and tries to campaign for conservatives all across Texas to get a Texas House that's not going to attack him. I know a member of the legislature who had to file a bill related to agriculture and couldn't tell anybody in the Texas House that Sid Miller supported the bill. Otherwise, it would die. The Department of Agriculture, the Commissioner of Agriculture, this is a state rep who's actually not even a hardcore conservative state rep. Most people would consider him among the more liberal Republicans. And he's got to just sneak a bill through. That's the way they're treating the Department of Agriculture. Therefore, the commissioner of the Department of Agriculture is going to treat them with hostility, and rightfully so. He's a rational actor in this case. The path to lowering the fights is having a leader that doesn't want to pick fights with everybody, and a leadership team that don't want to pick these fights. And here's the thing. Now Dustin Burrows and Greg Bonin are trying to figure out how to survive, but they would never even admit that they've picked a fight with anybody, right? So they can't even tell people, hey, I think part of the new Texas House needs to be such that we're not fighting with these people, because it's kind of implying that they did. And they have a hard time. And they might at some point wake up to the reality of the legislature that they have overseen in order to survive politically. But the amount of pressure that conservatives have to put on leadership to change is immense. And the grassroots. And that's what they've been doing. That's what the House has been doing. That's what conservatives in the House have been doing. That's what reformers have been doing. That's what the grassroots have been doing. That's what the Texas GOP has been doing. That's what the Attorney General's been doing. That's what the governor of the state of Texas, Greg Abbott, has been doing. That's what the lieutenant governor's doing. That's what Sid Miller's doing. So at what point are they going to say, yeah, we probably should pull back a little bit? Hopefully sooner rather than later for their sake. We want to focus on Democrats in Texas. We have a couple Republicans in the Texas House that keep standing in the way and taking the bullets, and they don't need to do it. You don't need to kill the Ten Commandments bill. You can investigate Texas Children's Hospital. You can do it. And if you do it, you stand out of the way so that we can all focus on the Democrats that want to ruin our state. But when Stephanie Click or Dustin Burrows or Dade Phelan or Brad Buckley, he sat on that Ten Commandments bill forever. When those guys stand in the way of Democrats, the bullets hit them. And then they blame us. And we're trying to attack the Democrats. We wish we could just say the Democrats killed the Ten Commandments bill. They didn't. We want to say the Democrats are on board with all this gross lawfare of Biden trying to put this doctor away for 10 years for revealing an 11-year-old got a transgender surgery. The problem is Democrats aren't doing jack. They're not sending letters to the speaker saying, don't do this. They're not putting pressure, calls, anything. You know what? They just know this guy responds to us because this is a joint leadership team. And he can't act outside of the bounds that we've kind of all set for each other. We can change that. That's why Democrat chairs are so important, because structure dictates behavior. And when you change the way the Texas House runs and the relationship status the Republican caucus has with the Democrat caucus, you create an environment where far more conservative policy moves through the process. That's how it works. May God bless you, and may God bless the great state of Texas.